Good evening, everyone. A long time no speak, but I'm back now for another couple of weeks, so I've got quite a few videos to get out on the small worm bin updates and so on. But for now, I wanted you to have a look at this. This is a stackable worm bin type system, and a friend of mine on Twitter, Jacqueline, she's an award-winning children's short story author, don't you know? Hi, Jacqueline. I thought now she had this type of system, but I subsequently found out it's actually a wheelie bin type setup, but it's a similar, it works in the same sort of principle. So I thought I'd shoot a very quick video because she had a problem, highly experienced as she is with running a worm bin. She's operated hers for 15 years or thereabouts. She's had a massive amount of either die off or the worms left the bin. Now there's just a quick look at the lid of this type setup, and this is an inherent problem with any kind of plastic bin. It produces lots of moisture, which encourages the worms to go exploring. I think in one of her tweets Jacqueline said she found 17 or 20 or something like that worms, and that was all that was left in the bin. So something went radically wrong there. Now this is the sump, and this is what I do with mine, and it's just an idea. You might find it useful, you might find it silly, but it works for me, and I don't see why it wouldn't work. The idea of this sump is that any excess fluid coming from the trays will drain into here, and then there's a tap on the sump, and you can open the tap, drain the fluid off, dilute it 1 to 10, and add it to your plants. I need to do a video on this because I don't, to me this is what you're getting is leachate, and it might not necessarily be good, even though it's coming through a worm bin. Because if you think about it, if your worm bin is that wet that there's an excessive amount of liquid leaching off it, it's become anaerobic because the water is occupying the space which would have been taken up by air, and the good bacteria and the worms need air. Now what I do with mine, you can see how wet this is, but it isn't actually a problem for the worms. As you can see, there's plenty of worms in the sump, and no matter what nice food I put into the trays, it doesn't stop them from going down and exploring the sump. I don't know why they find it so attractive, but they do. So what I do is I add cardboard, just lightly damped cardboard, to the sump. Now that's pure cardboard castings from the worms, and you can see how wet that is. This particular sump, if you noticed, it's got ridges on it, and the idea is that if worms drop down they're supposed to come out. It doesn't work. It just simply doesn't work because worms can't swim. So if you've got a couple of centimeters of water sitting right at the very bottom and worms go into that, they're not going to come out, and they will eventually suffocate once the oxygen runs out in the water. So I add damped cardboard. Any worms going down into the sump, they have food from the cardboard. They can safely navigate their way around the sump and get back up through the holes in the tray if they so choose. Or they can just stay in the sump and they're not going to suffocate. And they're not going to die because they have food. Now one of the things that Jacqueline mentioned was that her bedding, the worm bin was very wet. And I'm wondering if that is what the problem is, because according to Jacqueline, all the food was the same, there wasn't any drastic changes in the environment, the bin is as it is, and she successfully ran that bin for, 15 years, so she knows what she's doing. Sorry Jacqueline, I'm talking about you as if you're not watching the video, sorry. This is a bit like talking about somebody behind the back while they're actually standing beside you in the room. But anyhow, the point I'm making is you know what you're doing. So it's a bit of a mystery why it went wrong. And all I can think is that if the bin was that wet, it became anaerobic and the worms did literally die off. Although a bin like yours, I'm guessing it's reasonably large, you'd smell them. If there was a large die-off in a short amount of time, you would smell them. And you never said anything about smell, so I'm just wondering if they bailed out of the bin or died off at a slower rate than what you thought just because it became anaerobic. Now, as you saw there, I just simply, it's quite a simple matter then of just removing the cardboard with the worms and then I add some lightly damp cardboard. It needs to just be lightly damp. You don't want it dry, because worms going into that will then be sitting and moving through dry cardboard, which will dry them out, and you'll just find like little streaks of jelly. Well, not jelly, they become brittle after a while when they dry out. And if you put it in too wet, it's not going to do the job that you're putting it in for, which is to absorb the excess moisture. And you can see there that I just simply remove it from the sump and add it to the first tray. So I've caught any worms, I've caught the cocoons, I've caught any little babies that are thin as a hair and hard to see. And regardless of what I put in, I'm going to give these a little bit of melon now, and regardless, they'll still go back down into the sump, because that's just what worms do. So excluding any weird food stuff being added, which wasn't the case, you did mention you have a problem with badgers, but I think if a couple of badgers got in and ate all your worms, it'd be quite evident that the badgers were there. All I can think of really is the bin just became too wet for them. It became anaerobic, and they died off slowly, so you didn't particularly notice it. If there's only a couple of handfuls dying off every day, and that won't smell, because they'll just decompose so quickly. Or there was a massive bailout. Now, I've got another video up somewhere from some time back where I showed lots of leaves around my bins. Wherever I have worm bins standing, I put lots of leaves, lots of cardboard, stuff like that, because worms will bail out of an environment that is no longer suitable for them, or they're not happy with, in order to survive. But they don't like moving, because they know they're at risk. They've got about 60 minutes. Start the clock. They've got about an hour or so before they completely dry out, just in normal atmospheric conditions, which they seem to somehow know. And they've also they're at risk from birds and other predators when they're moving around. So if you haven't done it already, around the base of your wheelie bin, I would suggest just shredding up cardboard, keep it lightly damp, add some leaves around the base of it, make it look attractive. But any worms that bail out of your wheelie bin will settle in underneath the leaves and the cardboard. So if you think your population doesn't look right, it looks like it's dropped a bit, that's where they will be. If I can find that video, I'll put a link to it at the end of this one. And just add where the tap is in your setup, try this, just add some cardboard, shredded up cardboard, lightly damped, and then just when you feed your wheelie bin, keep an eye on it. And that's it. I hope you found that useful. I hope others might have found it useful. Best of luck with the new